I knew moving into a neighborhood with an HOA was a gamble, but I never expected it to turn into a full-blown war. My name's Barrett Folsom. I'm a paramedic, long shifts, irregular hours, and sometimes I just want to sleep without drama. I bought a simple two-story house on the corner of Brookpine Lane, thinking it would be a quiet place to crash after 12-hour shifts. That was before I met Lorraine. Lorraine Whitmore, the HOA president, mid-50s, frosted bob haircut, and a voice like a rusty gate. She had a clipboard practically welded to her hand and treated the HOA bylaws like they were gospel. From the first week, she made it her mission to enlighten me about rules I didn't know existed. "You can't park on the street overnight," she barked at me one morning while I was getting out of my truck. "This isn't some free-for-all trailer park." "I just got off a 12-hour shift," I said, shutting the door behind me. There was no space in my driveway. "It's not like I blocked anyone." She pointed that clipboard right at my chest. "It's in the bylaws. Section 8, Subarticle 3. You'll be fined." That's when I started documenting everything: dates, times, photos. Something about Lorraine didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just about rules, it was personal. A week later, I came home late again, around 2 in the morning. My driveway was blocked. Someone had left a golf cart halfway across it. I parked on the curb, made sure I wasn't obstructing anything, and went inside. Next morning, I came out to find both front tires slashed. Clean, deliberate cuts. I stood there, staring at the rubber flaps like my brain hadn't caught up yet. "What the?" That's when I noticed the neighbor across the street, old Mr. Halvorson, waving me over with a shaky hand. "Barrett," he said, "I saw her." "Saw who?" "Lorraine. She came out at 3:30. Walked up to your truck with something in her hand. I couldn't sleep, so I was reading on the porch. She slashed her tires and walked off like it was nothing." I blinked. "You sure?" "Son, I may be 82, but I know what a crime looks like." I didn't waste time. I called the sheriff, filed a report, and gave them a copy of the footage from the security cam I had installed last month. Lorraine didn't know about that one. The camera caught her crouching by my truck. She even looked up once, checking the street, then went back to work like she was pruning a hedge. The deputy came out in less than an hour. After reviewing the footage, he let out a low whistle and said, "Well, that's about as clear as it gets." "You gonna arrest her?" I asked. He nodded. "We're bringing her in." I leaned back on my porch and watched the patrol car roll down the street toward Lorraine's house. She was outside, clipping her roses like nothing had happened. The look on her face when the deputy stepped out and asked her to come with him? Priceless. She tried to protest, of course. "This is outrageous. I'm the HOA president," she shouted as they cuffed her. "Exactly," I muttered. "And you just broke the one rule that matters most. You got caught." The following morning, the neighborhood was quieter than I'd ever heard it. No sprinklers chattering, no dogs barking. Just a thick, sticky silence hanging over Brookpine Lane like fog. I didn't realize it then, but something had shifted. Lorraine's arrest had cracked the porcelain mask of control she wore over the HOA, and people were starting to whisper. I stood on the porch sipping burnt coffee from a chipped mug, watching as a few neighbors peeked out from behind curtains. No one came out to talk, but I could see it in their faces. They were waiting to see what would happen next. By noon, a white Lexus rolled up to Lorraine's house. Out stepped a broad-shouldered man in a navy pinstripe suit, clutching a leather briefcase. He rang the bell, waited, then unlocked the front door with a key. I didn't recognize him, but I didn't have to. The HOA attorney. I grabbed my phone and started recording from my porch. He entered, stayed exactly 17 minutes, then came out carrying a cardboard box stuffed with manila folders and a laptop. He glanced around nervously before tossing it all into the trunk and driving off. That evening, I walked across the street to check on Halvorson. His porch light was off, which was strange. I knocked anyway. He opened the door halfway, rubbing his temple with one hand. "You okay?" I asked, keeping my voice low. He stepped aside and motioned me in. They came around asking questions. Two guys in polo shirts said they were part of the interim compliance committee. Told me not to get involved. Said if I keep talking, I could be cited for interference. Whatever that means. I sat down across from him at his dining table. They threatened you? They didn't say the word, but it was there, between the lines. I leaned back, trying to piece it together. Lorraine was in jail, but her people were still moving. That attorney didn't show up out of loyalty, he was protecting something. The next day, I drove out to the county courthouse. I figured if Lorraine had been arrested, there'd be a public case file. I was right. A clerk handed me a thick folder with a case number stamped in red across the top. I read through the complaint, the sheriff's report, my security footage transcript, and something else. A sealed affidavit, recently added. It was from a woman named Dana Crenshaw. She used to be the HOA treasurer. Her affidavit claimed that Lorraine had been misappropriating HOA funds for over 2 years. Landscaping budgets inflated, security patrols billed but never delivered, and worst of all, she'd paid herself monthly consulting fees through a shell contractor called Blue Fern Management. Dana had kept copies of every financial statement. I brought the file to a friend of mine, Marcy, who works as a junior prosecutor at the DA's office. We met in college, lost touch for years, but reconnected when I moved back to the city. I called in a favor. She flipped through the documents, her eyebrows crawling higher with every page. "This isn't just petty theft," she said. "It's fraud. Wire fraud, falsification of financial documents, possibly even embezzlement, depending on how deep it goes." "She slashed my tires," I reminded her. Marcy nodded slowly. "That'll look like a drop in the bucket compared to this." By Friday, Lorraine had posted bail. She came home around dusk in a black sedan, her face a mask of calm fury. No one welcomed her back. Her porch light stayed off. Her mailbox overflowed with unopened letters. She didn't even glance at me as she walked inside. But the damage was done. Saturday morning, I was out back resealing the deck when I heard footsteps on gravel. Turning, I saw 3 neighbors approaching. Belinda from 2 doors down, Marcus, who ran the auto shop, and Mrs. Crenshaw Dana herself. "Mind if we talk?" Belinda asked. We sat under my awning with a pitcher of lemonade Dana had brought. She looked pale but determined. "I tried to warn people last year," Dana said, clasping her hands tightly. But Lorraine had the board wrapped around her finger. She'd manipulated quorum votes, removed dissenters, and even rewrote parts of the bylaws without notifying the homeowners. Marcus leaned forward. "We want to hold a special meeting. Officially. We've got the signatures." "How many?" I asked. 62. That's well over the 1/3 minimum.
Belinda handed me a printed agenda.
"We're voting to dissolve the current board and hold full elections. But we need someone to moderate the meeting. Someone who's not afraid of her." I stared at the paper for a long moment. "You want me? You're the reason people finally started speaking up," Dana said. "You've got more backbone than the rest of us combined." I agreed, but only under one condition: that the meeting be held in the open, at the local library's community room, and that we live stream it for transparency. They agreed. By the time Tuesday rolled around, word had spread. The room was packed, standing room only. Even the librarian looked stunned as people filed in, clutching folders, screenshots, and HOA notices they'd kept over the years. I stood at the front, took a long breath, and began. "We're here under Article 9, Section 4, to call for a vote of no confidence in the current HOA board," I said. "Any objections?" Lorraine, seated in the back, raised her hand. "This is illegal. You can't just nullify the board without proper—" Dana stood up. "You forged my resignation letter, Lorraine." Gasps echoed through the room. "You told everyone I quit," Dana continued, stepping forward. "But I never did. You had me removed after I confronted you about the blue fern invoices. Lorraine's eyes flicked toward the door. Sit down, someone called from the crowd. We're not done. Marcus rose next. I requested records last year twice. I was told they were unavailable. That's a violation of state homeowner statutes. Another voice chimed in. You fined me for painting my fence, even though we never approved a new color policy. One by one they stood. A nurse, a retired Marine, a bakery owner. People Lorraine had silenced, fined, threatened into submission. Now they were done being quiet. The vote wasn't even close. Out of 97 ballots cast, 93 voted to remove the board. 4 abstained. Lorraine didn't vote. When the room emptied, she stood rooted in place, her hands trembling ever so slightly. She locked eyes with me as I gathered the ballots. You think this is over? Her voice was low, venomous. I stepped closer.
No.
But I think it's your turn to be afraid. That night, Marcy called. The DA was preparing a formal indictment. Dana's affidavit had triggered a financial audit of the HOA's accounts. The preliminary report showed over $70,000 unaccounted for. What's worse, Marcy said, is she used HOA funds to pay the attorney who tried to hide the evidence. That's going to add conspiracy and obstruction. I walked outside and looked at Lorraine's house. The porch light was still off. No cars in the driveway. No movement behind the windows. By the end of the week, she was arrested again, this time on 5 counts of felony fraud and 1 for criminal mischief. The sheriff didn't even bother with sirens. Just pulled up, knocked on the door, and let her out in cuffs. No shouting this time. No roses in her hands. Just silence and flashing lights. Brookpine Lane hasn't been the same since, but in a good way. The new board includes Dana, Marcus, and Belinda. They hold monthly meetings at the library.
Open forum.
All discussions recorded and archived online.
No hidden fines.
No backdoor votes. And me? I still work long shifts. Still crash hard when I get home. But now, when I park in my driveway, or even on the street, I know no one's going to slash my tires for it. Especially not a woman serving 18 months in county for thinking she ran the world. Justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it looks like a porch light staying off for good. 2 weeks after Lorraine's second arrest, Brookpine Lane felt like a neighborhood waking from a long fever. The lawns still looked the same. The mailboxes hadn't moved, but something in the air had changed, like people were breathing easier for the first time in years. I hadn't seen her house lit once since the arrest. A notice had been taped to her front door by the county, property under investigation. No entry without authorization. That alone said a lot. Still, everyone knew the real story wasn't finished. Not even close. The new HOA board held their first full audit meeting that Saturday, and I was invited to sit in as a neutral advisor. They'd brought in a forensic accountant from a law firm downtown, guy named Elias Tran, sharp-dressed, soft-spoken, and relentless with spreadsheets. He had already uncovered several discrepancies that went beyond Lorraine's personal theft. What he revealed next pushed everything into darker territory. Elias clicked through a set of projected documents as the board and a few community members watched in tense silence. This, he said, highlighting one column, is where things get criminal on a whole different level. The screen showed transfer records from the HOA reserve fund, money meant for major repairs, like repaving streets or fixing storm drains. Over the course of 14 months, that fund had been drained from over $120,000 down to just under $3,000. The recipient? A private contracting firm listed as Greenbridge Solutions. That name doesn't ring any bells, said Belinda, flipping through her folder. We've never had a project that big. Elias nodded once. Because Greenbridge doesn't exist. It's a shell company registered to an address that turns out to be a P.O. box in another county. When I traced the owner, it led to a man named Kenneth Duval. He's listed as Lorraine's second cousin on a family trust they shared. Dana leaned forward. So, she was funneling our money into a fake company run by her cousin? Correct, Elias said, pulling up a scanned invoice. But it gets worse. These charges, hazard remediation, perimeter security adjustments, environmental stabilization, they're not just fake. They're designed to look like federally reimbursable expenses. Marcus furrowed his brow. What does that mean? It means, Elias explained, she was planning to apply for a federal grant using these forged documents, claiming the HOA had incurred environmental damage during last year's flood season. That flood barely covered the gutters, said Dana. Nobody even lost power. She was inflating damage reports to qualify for relief funds, Elias said. That's wire fraud and grant fraud. If she submitted anything to a federal agency, she's looking at serious time. I sat back in my chair. For a moment, no one said a word. Then Belinda broke the silence. We need to report this.
Now.
Elias reached into his briefcase and handed Dana a folder. Already done. I contacted the state attorney general's office as soon as I confirmed the shell company. They're coordinating with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. A federal investigator is reviewing the case. By the following Wednesday, 2 unmarked black SUVs showed up on Brookpine Lane. The agents entered Lorraine's house with a warrant and came out with boxes of documents, hard drives, and one very confused-looking paralegal who had apparently been hired after her arrest to organize her files. He didn't say a word as they led him to the car. Meanwhile, the new board started the long road of undoing the damage. Elias had prepared a list of legitimate vendors and estimated repair costs, and they began the task of rebuilding the reserve fund. But the neighborhood wasn't just healing financially. The residents had begun talking to each other in a way they hadn't for years. One afternoon, as I was replanting some drought-tolerant shrubs in my front yard, a woman I didn't recognize waved from the sidewalk. You're Barrett, right? I stood up, brushing dirt off my jeans.
Yeah.
That's me. She walked up with a clipboard, not Lorraine's kind, just plain metal.
I'm Tanya.
I just moved in on Elm Street. Noticed the changes around here and wanted to say thanks. I raised an eyebrow. For what? For not letting her scare you into silence. People around here have been afraid to speak up for years. I shook her hand. Well, it took a lot more than me. Took Halvorsen, Dana, the board, still, she said, smiling. You were the first one to drag it into the daylight. By the end of the month, Lorraine's case had escalated. The county DA filed additional charges based on the new evidence: 5 counts of grant fraud, 2 of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and 1 count of falsifying financial records submitted to a government agency. The feds joined the case soon after. Marcy called me from her office, her voice sharp with focus. They're treating this as a multi-level fraud case now. The federal prosecutor just filed a motion to freeze her assets, including that trust she shares with her cousin. If they find more fake contractors, it could expand into a racketeering charge. She's going to prison, isn't she?
For a long time, she said.
And not the country club kind. Court proceedings began shortly after. The judge denied bail this time, citing risk of document tampering and potential witness interference. Lorraine was remanded to county jail pending trial. I attended the first hearing just to see her face when the charges were read aloud. She didn't look like the same woman who used to bark about mailbox heights and hedge lengths. Her hair was unkempt, her jaw clenched tight, and her eyes scanned the courtroom like a trapped animal. When the prosecutor listed the charges, she didn't flinch, but her attorney did. Outside the courthouse, a news van idled at the curb. Reporters had started paying attention once the federal charges dropped. I kept walking past, didn't stop for interviews. I wasn't interested in sound bites. I just wanted my neighborhood back. Over the next few weeks, the board reviewed all pending disputes and reversed dozens of illegitimate fines. They even held a community amnesty day where residents could bring in complaints and have them resolved without penalty. People showed up with binders, receipts, pictures. It felt like a confession booth for years of quiet resentment. One guy, a welder named Adrian, brought in a stack of letters he'd gotten for non-compliant fencing. Turned out Lorraine had rejected his fence 3 times even though it matched the one in the HOA handbook. She just didn't like him. She said my yard wasn't a good fit for the aesthetic of the neighborhood, he said, shaking his head. Guess she didn't like blue collar. Dana looked him in the eye and said, "There's nothing wrong with hard work, Adrian. That fence is fine." He left with a smile on his face and a handwritten apology letter from the board. As fall settled in, a new sense of community took root. We held a neighborhood barbecue in the park near the elementary school. People brought food, set up folding tables, played music. It felt like something real. Not an event with brochures and HOA policies taped to every tree. Just neighbors. Halvorsen came too, wearing a veteran's ball cap and carrying a tray of deviled eggs. He sat next to me and watched the kids run around with paper kites. "Told you she'd get hers," he said, nodding once. "You sure did." He leaned back and stretched out his legs. For the first time in a long while, I don't feel like I have to keep my porch light on all night. That hit me harder than I expected. Not because of what he said, but because I realized I'd been sleeping through the night again, too. No more checking the driveway. No more late-night tire repairs. Just sleep. The trial was set for early spring. Until then, Lorraine would remain in custody. Her cousin was also indicted after investigators found links between Greenbridge Solutions and 2 other fake vendors in neighboring counties. Together, they were accused of siphoning over $350,000 from multiple HOAs using similar schemes. Brookpine Lane became a case study in recovery. Other neighborhoods started calling Dana and Marcus for advice. Marcy even helped them draft a neighborhood reform packet templates for transparent budgeting, open elections, and resident oversight. As for me, I stayed on as a non-voting advisor, just enough to stay involved, not so much that it felt like a second job. And when I parked my truck at the curb after a late shift, no one said a word, because now they knew. This wasn't Lorraine's neighborhood anymore. It never was. It belonged to the people who lived there, who worked, raised their kids, mowed their lawns, and just wanted peace. And now they finally had it. The morning after the neighborhood barbecue, I found a plain white envelope taped to my door. No stamp, no return address, just my name written in all caps with a shaky hand. I peeled it open and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It read, "You think you've won, but not everything is as clean as you think."
No signature. Just that.
I stood there on the porch, holding the note like it might combust. The handwriting wasn't Lorraine's. Hers was sharp and precise, the kind of script that curled around itself like ivy. This was different.
Rushed.
Sloppy. Maybe even panicked. I wasn't new to threats. Being a paramedic, you learn how to read the difference between someone blowing off steam and someone getting desperate. I called Detective Ames. He'd been assigned to the financial case after federal charges were filed, and we'd spoken a few times before. I didn't expect him to answer on the first ring. "Still getting fan mail, are we?" he said dryly after I read the note to him. "I don't think it's from Lorraine," I said. "She doesn't write like this." "No, she doesn't. But she had help." "That's not speculation, it's fact." He told me something that hadn't been made public yet. During the forensic audit, they traced several HOA decision memos back to a second IP address. Not one associated with Lorraine's home or the HOA offices. "Where?" I asked. "Belongs to someone in the neighborhood. A guy named Roger Keener. Used to be listed as Neighborhood Compliance Liaison." Ever heard of him? I had. He used to patrol the streets on an electric scooter, clipboard in hand, measuring grass with a ruler. He vanished about 6 months before Lorraine's arrest. People assumed he'd moved. Apparently, he hadn't. Where is he now? I asked. That's what we're trying to figure out. His house is empty, but his name's still on the deed. If he's involved, he's in deep. I turned the envelope over in my hand again. You think he wrote this? I think someone did. And I think they're scared. That afternoon, I walked past Keener's house. The blinds were drawn so tight it looked like the windows were stitched shut. A single porch light buzzed faintly in the daylight. I noticed the grass hadn't been cut in over a month, and there was a stack of unopened mail wedged into the front door. I didn't go any closer. Instead, I called Dana and filled her in. She didn't sound surprised. When I took over the files, I found a folder labeled Red Line Protocol. It was encrypted, but Elias cracked it last night. It's full of emails between Lorraine and Keener. What kind of emails? Ones where she gives him lists of non-compliant houses and tells him to push them out. She was targeting residents, especially ones who had filed complaints or refused to pay fines. My stomach turned. She was trying to drive people out of their homes. She called it curating neighborhood character.
And Roger just
did it. Not just did it. He created fake incident reports, forged maintenance requests, even sent legal-looking notices that weren't from any actual attorney. There's a spreadsheet of his successes. 6 families sold within 2 months of getting repeated violations. I sat down hard on the bench by the community garden. My fingers curled around the edge of the seat. That's harassment. It's organized harassment. Dana's voice was flat.
Yes.
And now it's a federal civil rights issue. By the end of the week, the FBI issued a warrant for Keener's arrest. But he was gone. Surveillance footage from a gas station 2 towns over showed him boarding a bus heading west 3 days earlier. No phone activity. No credit card use. Just gone. But the paper trail he left behind was enough. The prosecution added charges of conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice, and multiple counts of targeted discrimination under the Federal Fair Housing Act. Lorraine, still in custody, refused to cooperate. Her lawyer filed a motion to suppress the emails, claiming they were obtained without proper authorization. Judge didn't buy it. Motion denied. The trial began in early January. I testified on the second day. The courtroom was tense, but not theatrical. The prosecution didn't need drama, they had evidence. Financial records. Security footage. Internal emails. Witnesses from the neighborhood. When I took the stand, I told them what happened that night with my tires. I described the slashing, the footage, the threats. But what made the jury lean in was what came after. I told them about the silence. The fear. The way neighbors stopped speaking to each other because they thought they'd be next. How Lorraine turned our streets into a chessboard, and we were just pawns to her. The defense tried to paint me as a disgruntled troublemaker. Said I had a personal vendetta. That's when Marcy, who had joined the prosecution team by then, stood up with a stack of affidavits, over 30 of them, all from residents who had been fined, harassed, or falsely accused by Lorraine's regime. The jury didn't take long. After 8 days of testimony and 2 hours of deliberation, they returned with a unanimous verdict.
Guilty. On all counts.
The judge sentenced Lorraine to 19 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 12. The courtroom was still as stone when the sentence was read. She didn't cry.
Didn't yell.
She just sat there, blinking slowly, like the weight of it hadn't quite landed yet. Keener was still at large, but the case was far from cold. The FBI issued a federal warrant, and his name was listed on the National Fugitive Database. They'd catch him eventually. People like him always leave footprints. In the weeks following the verdict, something remarkable happened. A group of residents formed a neighborhood restoration committee, not an official HOA, just a volunteer group focused on rebuilding trust. They planted trees, repaired sidewalks, and created a shared community space by the park. Kids started playing outside again. People waved when they passed each other. It felt
right.
One evening, I stood beside Halvorsen as we watched a group of teenagers hanging string lights between two trees. "Never thought I'd live to see this," he said. "You ever think about moving?" I asked.
Not anymore, he said.
"This place is worth staying for now." I nodded.
Yeah.
It is. The new board, now completely transparent and without pay, voted to eliminate all remaining fines issued under Lorraine's tenure. They issued apology letters to those affected and created a new digital system where residents could see every decision made in real time. There were no secrets anymore. No closed doors. As for me, I still worked the same shifts. Still came home exhausted. But when I parked out front, I didn't glance over my shoulder. I didn't check for notes taped to my door. I didn't wonder whether someone was watching. Because the darkness that used to hang over Brookpine Lane had been dragged into the light. And it wasn't coming back.